talking about food babies, stomach bloating. Um, that feeling you get after a meal when you actually look pregnant. I used to name my food babies. I don't get them anymore, but I used to get quite creative. So we're talking about after you eat, you get this like crazy bloated stomach, right? You know what I'm talking about. And then after a few hours, it eventually goes away, only to find it coming back after the next meal, right? And you try to figure it out, but you don't know what causes it or how to get rid of it. It's such a common issue that I decided to do a talk about it today. So let's talk about what bloating is. And once we understand what it is, we can discover how to treat it. But as always, I like to let you know how to reach me and my team. It's called the New Method. It's called New, spelled with a K, because you always knew there was a better way. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, website, obviously. And for those of you listening to me on the podcast, I'm wearing a white sweatshirt. Other than that, you're not missing anything. But wherever you are, whatever platform you're on, you can find us, you can message us, and we will connect with you. Okay, back to bloating. Bloating happens, as you know, when the GI tract becomes filled with air or gas. And a bloated stomach feels horrible. It feels tight. It feels full. Sometimes it's painful. But when you find out what's actually causing this gas, I'm pretty sure you're going to be blown away. Now, every one of you here listening, if you're here, obviously this topic speaks to you. It's because you experience bloating, right? Abdominal bloating. And maybe you went already to the doctor, medical provider, specialist, and you say, hey, I have this food baby every time I eat. And the providers kind of say, well, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you have IBS, or maybe it's in your head, or maybe it's anxiety. Maybe you need some fiber, or maybe take some meds to calm it down. And you walk out and you're like, I don't know, this doesn't make sense. I'm so uncomfortable. There must be something else. What is it? And before I do a deep dive into this, and we're going to get really technical today, I need to let you know always, 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 you have to rule out a medical issue first. Because there are times that bloating indicates a serious issue. So the first thing you do is get evaluated by your GI. And for the women listening here, you also need to be evaluated by your GYN. Okay. Never skip that step, never self diagnose. But when you do all that and they tell you everything is fine, now you're in the right place. Okay. So don't skip that step. I tell you that every week. So while food baby, this bloating is not life threatening, it's really life altering, right? It's so annoying and it really gets in the way of feeling well. So let's get down to it. What we have to do is get to the root cause. That's what we do every week, is get to the root cause, because bloating is your body trying to tell you something. But let's go with the obvious one, right? It's super obvious, but I have to mention it before we go into the technical stuff. And the bottom line is, some of y'all you just don't chew your food. You're like in such a rush that you just swallow big chunks of food with huge chunks of air. And that's kind of an easy solution to bloating. Slow it down. A lot happens when you chew your food. Don't skip this step. Chewing your food starts your digestion. When you chew, you make saliva. The saliva has enzymes in it. It starts breaking down the food, especially carbs and fats. Chewing also mechanically breaks the food into small pieces, making it easier to swallow and less stressful for your esophagus. It also helps your stomach digest the food. And as you chew, your body gets ready to digest food and makes more digestive enzymes and juices. And of course, chewing properly helps prevent stomach issues, including bloating. And chewing keeps you mindful, lets your body realize when it's full. Okay. So that's just kind of an obvious one. Now, for those of you who are chewing and you're like, okay, I got it, super obvious, that's not my issue. Don't worry, we're not stopping there. I just need to let you know because some of y'all are not chewing. Okay. So the big issue really is that, putting the swallowing air aside, the big issue is that when you have bloating, when you have air in your belly, guess what? That air is not made by you. Humans do not make gas. The gas in your belly, you didn't make that. The bacteria in your belly made that. So you have gas, bloating, distension, food baby. Guess what? That's the bacteria in your belly feasting and having a party and making gas. Now, if you don't already know, you have an entire world of bacteria in your belly. It's called a microbiome, and it's a key part of how we survive. If you listen to any of my episodes every week, we talk about it. The bacteria in there are so important to keep us balanced. And when the bacteria are balanced, they produce things we need to survive and thrive. But when they're not balanced, they cause a mess. So if you're constantly bloated, there's an imbalance in your microbiome. This imbalance is called dysbiosis, just a fancy word for it. Okay. Dysbiosis means there's an imbalance in the ratio of good to bad bacteria. Okay. So now, on the one hand, you might have too much bad bacteria. For example, if you have certain species of harmful bacteria in your belly, when they're activated, meaning when they get food, right? When you feed these bacteria, they produce more gas because that is their metabolic process. When these bacteria dominate the gut, they ferment undigested food, they produce gases like hydrogen, methane, carbon dioxide. This chemical process that's happening for the bacteria in your belly is what causes the bloating. Okay, so that's if you have too much of the bad stuff. And that happens. So, for example, if someone eats a meal that's high in complex carbs, like beans, right? We all know beans. And if your gut is full of gas producing bacteria like Clostridium, the fermentation of this carbs will result in too much production of gas, leading to bloating. So it's not the beans, it's the bacteria that are processing the beans that are causing the bloating. Okay, so one part is having too much bacteria. But on the other hand, you might not have enough of the good bacteria, right? So when you have good bacteria, it helps you. It creates a healthy gut. It helps you break down food. It helps you absorb nutrients. When you have dysbiosis, this gets disrupted. So the food sits there longer because you don't have enough of the good guys. And when the food sits there longer, it produces gas. So think of a person who maybe doesn't have enough of something called lactobacilli, which is important for carbohydrate digestion, like lactose, right? Or certain bacteria that help you digest fruit. So if you are missing those bacteria every time you have um, dairy or fruit, you're going to, it's going to ferment, it's going to sit there, it's not going to get digested well, and that causes the bloating. So dysbiosis is about too much bacteria, too much bad bacteria, or not enough good bacteria. And don't forget, for all my brothers and sisters out there with I don't feel good itis, this situation not only causes bloating, but it also increases inflammation in the gut lining. And this inflammation can disrupt the gut's normal barrier function and motility, making digestive issues worse. So this inflammation can mess with the gut lining, make you more sensitive, reacting to more gas buildup, contributing to discomfort, and now you're like in this forever cycle, right? So if your gut microbiome have imbalance, promotes inflammatory bacteria like certain E. coli strains. This leads to inflammation of the gut lining. This inflammation now slows down the transit of food, leading to fermentation and gas buildup and in causing bloating, right? You're stuck in this forever loop. And now you all know that this would not be one of my episodes if I didn't have a tissue moment. So tissue moment it is, my human moments. Okay, so food baby, bloating, too much bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria, all rolled up with inflammation, all of which slows down the food movement, right? So now we're stuck forever. So you're starting to see how the gas in your belly is all about the microbiome and the dysbiosis. Now, dysbiosis can occur anywhere in the GI tract. And let's walk through that because you might be familiar with some of these things. You're like, oh, yeah, hey, that's me, that's me. So it could happen in the stomach itself. Now, stomach doesn't mean the whole thing, the stomach, it's an organ, right? So it could happen if you have an infection like H. pylori. H. pylori is a bacteria that can infect the stomach. And sometimes it causes ulcers or chronic gastritis. So if you have H. pylori, think about it. Right now, it altered the stomach's environment. This H. pylori now, not only is it like messing with the good and bad, it's too much of the bad, it reduces stomach acid, something called hypochlorhydria, which means there's not enough acid. Guess what that does? It makes more imbalance because certain bacteria need the acid to live into it. So that causes bacterial overgrowth of the stuff we don't want, bloating, and indigestion. So sometimes the first sign before we get diagnosed with H. pylori is this constant bloating. So food baby. So that's when it's in the stomach. Now let's keep going down the GI because now let's talk about something called SIBO. Some of you might be like, hey, SIBO crowd right here. SIBO, small intestinal bowel overgrowth. That means that the dysbiosis, instead of happening in your stomach, it's happening in your small intestine. So you have too many bacteria in the small bowel. And these bacteria are not supposed to be there. So when the food hits a small bowel, they start working on that food and they start to off gas, and that causes bloating. Now, the other part of SIBO that's a problem, it's not just this bloating, but the small intestine is where a lot of nutrients are absorbed. So now you have a malabsorption problem. Now, here's a really cool thing about SIBO when it's really going to drive the point home, in my opinion. The way you diagnose SIBO is with a breath test. So here's how it works. You drink a liquid that activates the bacteria that's not supposed to be in the small intestine. When this bacteria is activated, it off gases, it releases methane. So then you take a special bag and you breathe into it. And if there's methane in that bag, it proves that you have SIBO. Right? So this is exactly what I'm saying. Like it is the gas is created by the bacteria. That's exactly how you diagnose SIBO. Now, when you have SIBO, this is why some of you might have heard of FODMAP diets, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of this. But high FODMAP foods like onions, garlic, wheat, certain fruits. If you have SIBO and you eat onions and garlic and wheat, you're destroyed. You're a mess, and that's because the bacteria in the small intestine that are not supposed to be there, they start to prematurely work on this. They start to ferment on these foods and in the small intestine instead of the large intestine. And that causes food baby because the small intestine can't handle the large volumes of gas. Moving out down the GI system, we covered stomach, went to small intestine. Now, of course, you can have colonic dysbiosis in the colon, in the lower tract, right? The large intestine. Again, it's just a balance of bacteria, but this time in the colon, it's disrupted. And when you have large intestine dysbiosis, tends to be that you're extremely sensitive to foods high in soluble fibers, beans, lentils, vegetables, because again, it's supposed to manage it. That's the area that's supposed to manage it. But if you have an abnormal amount of bacteria that's managing the soluble fiber, now you have an overgrowth of gas-producing bacteria, which leads to excessive fermentation, aka too much gas. Okay, so you're getting the idea that no matter where your gas is originating from in your GI tract, it's not actually you. It's the bacterial imbalance that's causing the gas. So you can begin to understand that the treatment has to be focused on the dysbiosis. Okay, so the next question is, what causes this dysbiosis? Now, there's many causes, but let's look at them. So we're going to make a list so we can start understanding where the treatment comes from. So first on the list is something called post-infectious dysbiosis. This is for those of you who say, ever since I was sick, my stomach's never been the same. Okay, so usually after an acute GI, sometimes people have traveled and they had like a really bad virus. It could be a bacteria, something where there was a really bad GI moment, and they have an intense immune response to the infection and inflammation. And even after the virus is cleared, it's months, years, they're never the same. That's post-infectious dysbiosis. There's just been such an imbalance and there was no focus on recovery. So you have this bloating, intermittent diarrhea, constipation. For many people, they'll say this is when their IBS started. You all know how I feel about IBS. And if you don't, check out my episode on IBS. Next, very commonly, is we have post-antibiotic dysbiosis, right? Now, we know antibiotics are important. You know I'm not against medications. They kill bacteria, and there's no doubt that there are times when we need it. But we take too many of them, and it's in our food, and it's in our milk. And in my age group, we got it every other second when we were kids because our parents thought that was the right thing to do. God bless them. And some of you still now keep going to your primary care and saying, oh, I have a cold for 36 seconds. Please give me antibiotics. Okay, stop doing that because antibiotics don't just go in and kill the bad bug, right? They go in and kill anything in its power to kill, right? So what happens is now you have this resultant imbalance in the good and the bad bacteria, and now it's a mess. You have this imbalance, right? Because it kills the good and the bad. So after so much antibiotics, you have this imbalance in your gut flora. And again, bloating, diarrhea, sometimes yeast infections. And long term, this imbalance can affect overall gut health and immune function. Next up on our list, antacids, acid blocking drugs. This is like so common. One of the things that people don't realize is that these acid blocking drugs, which by the way are the third leading class of drugs sold in America, these are like Prilosec, Protonix, Nexium, all those drugs. They're given out like candy and they cause bacterial overgrowth, right? Because they change the pH inside your belly. They cause bacterial overgrowth. Sometimes they cause fungal overgrowth because there's a change. So while you may not have heartburn, it feels good, you end up getting irritable bowel, IBS, bloating, because that's one of the side effects of these drugs. So I think it's important for people taking these to realize that this should not be lifelong drugs. Again, not telling you to stop them. You need to work with someone to taper off. But what you really want to do is fix the underlying problem so that you don't need them in the first place. And last but not least, the most classic cause of dysbiosis is the diet induced dysbiosis, right? The standard American diet dysbiosis. And if you're still eating standard American diet, come on, it's time to stop. Okay. Let me walk you through this. So if you're eating high sugar processed foods, right? You're eating this, you're basically feeding the bacteria that love simple carbs. Remember, these are living things inside of you, and you're choosing which one of them you're going to feed. Are you feeding the good guys or are you feeding the bad guys? The high sugar processed foods, you're feeding the bad guys. These bacteria love these types of food, and now they start to outnumber the good guys. So every time you take a spoonful of something, I need you to know you're feeding the bad guys. And guess what? These bad bacteria are also connected to obesity, and they love carbs. And they are, there's a cat here, sorry. And they allow less of the bacteria that help process good food, right, to grow. Also, people who eat high processed foods tend to eat less fiber, right? And fiber is crucial for gut health. If you don't have fiber, you don't have proper gut health, okay? Because it feeds the fiber feeds the good bacteria. In fact, fiber helps increase the bacteria that make something called short chain fatty acids, which we need to reduce inflammation. So a low fiber diet actually leads to a decrease in these good guys. Okay. Anyone who's watching this now sees my cat's tail in here. It is what it is. We're real. It's happening. Thanks, Jack. Thanks for being part of the show. Okay, so this high sugar processed foods, part one is the bacteria. The second part that it does is now you're eating the same thing over and over again, right? If you're constantly eating chicken nuggets and french fries and you like three things on your diet and you're not willing to diversify, this limited variety in your diet reduces the diversity in your gut microbiome because you're feeding the same guys all the time and you're not feeding the other ones. So they die off. Each type of bacteria needs different nutrients. And if you're feeding them the same thing all the time, guess what happens? Right? And now you have this microbiome, and now you have all this undigested food that sits there, which ferments and causes bloating and discomfort. And you have impaired gut motility, means things are slowing down. So now instead of things moving through the system quickly as it should or quick enough, right? You don't want it too quick because that's diarrhea. But now things are slowing down, which can cause bloating. Or on the other side, if it's too fast because you've agitated certain things, now we have diarrhea. So either way, you have an impaired gut motility, too fast, too slow as a result of your food choices. So bottom line, diet-induced dysbiosis occurs with a standard American diet. High processed foods, low in fiber, it leads to a hot mess. Okay. Now, P.S. I'm going to continue about bloating, but just a little quick note in case you slept through all my other episodes. This dysbiosis that we're talking about, it's not just about bloating, right? It actually causes disease. The gut microbiome is linked to type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, allergy disorders, mental health issues. Your microbiome is everything. So it's not just about calming down your belly. It's really about calming down your whole system. Okay. I had to say that. So you get it now. Bloating and gas and food baby is about the microbiome. It feels like it's the food, but it's actually the bacteria reacting to the food. So what do we do next? How do we fix it? Well, number one, we identify and eliminate the cause, right? We have to remove the offending agent. If it's antibiotic induced, generally speaking, avoid unnecessary use of antibiotics. There are ramifications. Your belly is going to be a mess. And if your antibiotics are necessary, be sure to take the time to heal, right? It's not just going to go back to normal. After a bout of antibiotics, it might be time for probiotics. I'm going to get into that in a minute. If you've had a bad virus, make sure to take the time to support the immune system and help recover from viral infections. If you're on antacids, try to avoid them. Work with someone to taper if possible. Don't do it on your own. And of course, if it's diet induced, shift to a different diet, different nutrition, right? This is not to be on a diet. When I say diet, I mean like a nutritional plan. Reduce your processed foods and sugars. Again, if you haven't watched my episode, I did a whole episode on food as either being medicine or poison. Go catch it and it'll help you out. So, when we talk about nutrition, when we work with our patients, we really customize it depending on their history, their story, what their level of motivation is. Sometimes we do a full elimination diet. Sometimes it's dairy free. Sometimes it's gluten free. Sometimes people need to be on a low FODMAP diet. I promised you I would explain what FODMAP is. It is like the worst acronym in the world because it's like what FODMAP stands for. Here's the words. Here are the words. Like what do the words even mean? Fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Sure. Thanks for the acronym. Amazing. Bottom line is those of you with dysbiosis, especially SIBO, these oligosaccharides, things like wheat, rye, onions, garlic, legumes. Disaccharides are lactose and dairy. Monosaccharides are fructose, like high fructose corn syrup, honey, apples. Polyols like sorbitol, mannitol. When you eat those, you feel really, really unwell. So for some people, we have to put them on a FODMAP diet. The point is there is some customizability, but in general, if you want to know what to do, this is really all you need to do. You look down on your plate and say, do I have colors on my plate? I need colors on my plate. Okay. You can't just have chicken nuggets. Okay. You need colors on your plate. Your fruit, your vegetables, your fruits, your spices count also. And then you put a piece of protein in it. If you are eating animals, then a good quality animal protein. If you are not eating animals, then a good quality vegan source protein. And then you put some fat on it. Olive oil is ideal, or some nuts. There you have it. That's your plate in general. Okay. And you want to ensure diversity, different fruits, different vegetables, different whole grains, different proteins. Don't eat the same grilled chicken and broccoli for the rest of your life. You need microbial diversity. Okay. And of course, hydration, water, water, water. Don't forget water. So that's our nutrition. Then the next R, this 5R programs is replace. Okay. So we removed, we have to replace. This is a time to consider digestive enzymes, especially if your bloating is not immediate. If your bloating is about an hour or two later, where it's not stomach, it's small intestine, large intestine, digestive enzymes might really be key for you. Whereas if your bloating is immediately after eating, you might want to consider a supplement that has HCl in it to replace some of the acid that you might be missing in your belly. So that's replacing. Now, only when things are calmer should you consider re-inoculating with probiotics. Okay, when things are calm and repaired, that's when you re-inoculate. Because if you start too early, if you just start while your belly's a hot mess, or probiotics, you're going to make an even bigger mess. So probiotics, we could either get it through supplements, like yogurt, something that you can get through a pill, or with foods like yogurt, kefir, fermented vegetables. And then you want prebiotics, which is basically the food for probiotics. Because remember, probiotics are alive. You have to feed them. Prebiotics, asparagus, bananas, things like that are prebiotics. And then you want to consider repairing. You can use gut healing foods, bone broth, aloe vera, omega-3 rich foods, or supplements that have short chain fatty acids. And then last but not least, and this is the part people forget, lifestyle adjustments. Some people are so great with removing foods and reintroducing foods, but they forget to manage their stress. They forget to sleep. And if you've heard me by now, you know I don't care how much gluten-free ice you're eating. If you're not sleeping, your health is not on point, and you need to move. You need to move. I don't like to say exercise. You just need to move. The order is really important. If somebody has an overgrowth of bacteria in the wrong place, as I said, the probiotics can make it worse. If you take a probiotic and you feel more bloated or your digestion feels worse, it's the wrong time. Okay. So it's really important that you get that right. So the bottom line is this: your food baby, it's not you, it's your bacteria. Work with someone like me and my team. You can find us on any platform at the New Method or our website, or work with another guide. The point is, you don't have to stay with this food baby. It's time to let it go. Whatever you decide, don't stop looking. Be a game changer. And remember, I called it the New Method because you always knew there was a better way. I'll talk to you guys soon.